So now a really important thing is in Lightroom to make local adjustments. So for example, we have the adjustment brush at the top here. If we click it, you see that our mouse is now like a brush. A new section flips here, and we have the same settings as we have in the basic section of Lightroom. So we can, for example, adjust exposure, contrast, highlights just to a specific part of the image. For example, let's say we want to light up the boat a bit here in the left hand side. We can boost the exposure a bit and then just go with our brush and brush over the boat. Let's boost it a bit more, and you see our boat gets brighter, and only the boat. So we can adjust only the boat here, only the things we brushed in. For example, if you think here we need a bit more reflection, just brush over it, make a little reflection here in the water, no problem at all. But of course, make sure that it doesn't look weird and unnatural. If you're pressing the Alt key and holding the Alt key, you have the eraser, and you can just erase a bit of the things we just brushed in. So if you scroll down a bit, here is the settings for the brush, the size, the feathering. I always choose feathering 100, feather 100. Flow and density around 75, 80 is fine. And yeah, that's the thing with the brush. We can also turn the brush strokes on and off, that we see what we changed with these local adjustments of the adjustment brush. Okay, we can also say that we want a bit more yellow the boat, just a bit, or boost the shadows in the boat a bit, bring the exposure down a bit. If you think it's too much, you can also here erase something. Okay, maybe like this. Yeah, until we think it is fine. Then we click done, and we're done. Okay, so with the adjustment brush, you can also make a new brush. If you click here on the brush again, click new. Here's our first brush strokes. If we click here, we can edit them again. And if we click new, we can make a new brush and, for example, brighten the fortress a bit. Here, okay, fine, and click done. Okay, adjustment brush, very important. Then we have the radial filter. Radial filter is also very important. For example, if we want to take a little sunset here, or make it a bit more dynamic, we can just make a radial filter here. Scroll down a bit and make sure your feather is at 100, because otherwise it does look very unnatural and you will see these radial filters then in the final image, and we doesn't want that. We want to make things natural or look natural. So feather 100 is very important. You can invert the mask. If you don't invert the mask, everything which is located outside of the radial filter will be affected. Here, if you invert the mask, everything in the inside will be affected with our adjustments. For example, you can make it a bit more orange here, add a bit saturation. Maybe here we can add a bit clarity, just a bit, to boost the clouds a bit. Not too much clarity. Okay. And make it a bit brighter. Just like this. So I think you see you're getting the gist. These local adjustments only affect parts of the image which we choose to be affected. And very important, you can also make more radial filters than one, of course. The same as with the brush. Okay, the next and the third important local adjustment tool is the graduated filter. It is, for example, like if you have a graduated ND filter in landscape photography, you try to darken up the sky. You can also do this in post-production. Of course, your sky must be full with details, and if it's blown out or burned out, it's too late, of course. But then we cannot recover things. But otherwise, if everything's exported right, then we have no problem and can, for example, make the sky a bit darker. If we think, we can just make it a bit darker on the right hand side, no problem, our gradient, and boom, wonderful. So now this is affected. If we again turn it off and on, you see how things change the image. And yeah, I kind of like this. Maybe a bit darker here. Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, here you can remove red eyes, and here you can, it's like a spot removal tool like in Photoshop, but I would recommend you to do these things in Photoshop. So if you have dust on your lens, remove the spots in Photoshop. It's my advice, because it is not so good in Lightroom, so it doesn't work really well here in Lightroom. So I'd recommend you to use this in Photoshop. Yeah, so these were the local adjustments here on the top. And now, at the end, of course, we have to sharpen the image. For sharpening, I keep the standard settings that Lightroom has in the beginning. So I leave all these things here, amount 25 and so on and so on. But noise reduction, as I open up the shadows to 100%, there's a bit of noise if you zoom in. So I do kind of noise reduction, maybe luminance 10, that just a bit of the noise is reduced. And then maybe color noise reduction, of course, as well, because this doesn't affect the sharpness of the photo, I recognize. And the sharpening for the final image, I do the final sharpening then in Photoshop with different filters, but I will show you this later in the upcoming lessons as well. So here in Lightroom I keep the sharpening, I just do a bit of noise reduction, and the rest I will do in Photoshop. So the next important part is lens corrections. This is enabled when you open an image. So if I turn it off, you see what happens here. The kit lens of the Sony a6000 has a bit distortion and vignetting. You can see this. And Lightroom has the many profiles imported already, and you can just enable the profile correction, but this should be enabled automatically, so you don't have to do anything. Also make sure that remove chromatic aberration is on, because there's always a little bit of chromatic aberration in every image, so depending on how good your lens is, of course, but I make it on, I turn it on every editing, so yeah, no problem. Here the transform section in Lightroom is also very important. It usually works very well. If you just click auto, it transforms your image that it is very straight, that the horizon is leveled up correctly. In this image, I tried it often in this image, but it doesn't work with this image. Maybe because there is not really visible an horizon, and it's very difficult for Lightroom to find out here the correct position, the correct level. But as we level it up already with the crop tool, we don't need this now. But in the other editings, we just need the upright function, but mostly all the time, only the auto function here. So we can skip this. Effects, also important. We can make a post-crop vignetting, for example, to close the image, to make it more dynamic, to really get the viewer into the image. And I like vignettes. So here we can change the midpoint, see what happens, the roundness of the vignette, the feathering. So, okay. And also, yeah, we can add grain, but I think this makes no sense. I want to reduce noise and not to add noise. So if you need it here, under the point grain, you can add some grain. Also important here, dehaze. Many people overdo it with this function, so they just go like boom. Now you see these pictures often in social media, don't you? With too much contrast, too much clarity, and just overdone it. I think this, I don't like this. I like a natural image look, and yeah. So don't overdo it with dehaze. It adds more contrast, it adds more color, of course, but we already did this with the adjustments on the top, so I think I don't often use this dehaze function. And in the last section of Lightroom, we have the camera calibration. We can change the way Lightroom is interpreting our RAW files. I always keep Adobe standard. We can also choose a camera landscape. It takes some time, but then you see how it is interpreted differently, completely differently, and it looks completely different here. Yeah, but mostly I go with Adobe standard, so this is too saturated for me. I would have to now decrease the saturation again, but I go with Adobe standard, works fine. And you can also here, for example, again choose the red tones, that they are more orange, more red, so saturation of red tones to get a specific image look. But yeah, I don't often use this camera calibration section. Okay, so these were the basics of the basics. So the most important functions of Lightroom. Also the local adjustments I've showed you. And with this knowledge, we can work on our next images.